Hey class. So in this video, we're going to introduce the web topic. This is our last topic of the semester. So we're in week 10 now, and we're going to get started. In this video, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we're going to be working on, and then I'll talk a little bit about the internet and a little bit of history and terminology that will be useful for understanding what we'll be working on with our project. In another video, I'll go over some basic HTML, which is the sort of basic language that we use to create content for the web. And then we'll also publish a simple website using GitHub. Next week, we'll talk about CSS, which is a styling language, which adds color and typography and things like that, layout to websites. And then in the final week, in week 12 for this unit, we'll add media into our HTML page. And so then we'll publish a website. The loose theme is a choose your own adventure story. So I'll kind of demo how to do that. If you want to do something slightly different, that's fine, as long as it follows the basic requirements. And we'll keep working with the web. For our final project, we'll create another website that uses a new piece of media. So let's go over to the web section, and then we'll talk a little bit about the internet as well. We'll look at the assignment and some of the resources here. So I'm going to do demos going over HTML and CSS. We're going to use a text editor called Sublime Text. This is just my preferred editor. You could really use anything if you want to use something else. And then we'll use GitHub, which is a code publishing platform, but we can also use it to publish our website. There's a few tutorials and resources here. There's an interesting times visualization. Sorry, myself smaller. About how the cloud works, and I'll talk a little bit about that in this video, but you might want to check out that for more information. There's some tutorials on Don't Fear the Internet, which is kind of a really good HTML and CSS tutorial website, and then there's some more tutorials from Mozilla Developer Network. This is a little preview of what the project is going to look like. So the concept is to create a choose your own adventure story. So if you've never done a choose your own adventure story, this just means that the reader has options of different branches to go down in the story, and there's lots of different ways to kind of weave those branches together. We'll look at how to build everything that we need to build in HTML, and then we'll add some simple styling, and we'll also add some media as well. And then for the submission, this is very similar to the previous projects. We're gonna, send a link to the website. We'll send a link to the code on GitHub. So you won't have to actually send your edit files for this one because they'll be published on GitHub. And I'll go over that in another video. And then we have our project statement as usual. So that's what we'll be working on for the next couple of weeks. In this video, I'm just going to get started talking a little bit about what the internet is and how it works. And then we'll get into our HTML demo in the next video. To get started, I'm sure you guys are very familiar with the internet. You probably use it constantly. Obviously, you're using it to take this class right now. The goal of this unit is to understand sort of the basic technology underlying the internet, and how we publish things online and access things online, and then to also be able to use those technologies to build our own website. So let's get started. Let's take a look at the first website. So if you Google first website, this is the first website that was published on the web. Actually, it doesn't. Oh, here it is. Usually it shows up right at the top. Oh, I misspelled. Whoops. Okay, here we go. First website. So we go here. You can see the first website that was ever published. And it says World Wide Web at the top because the World Wide Web is the sort of instance or version of the internet that we use most of the time in our day-to-day life. We tend to think of the internet as being this one thing, but our internet is really the World Wide Web, which is a version of the internet that was implemented when this was created in the early 90s. I think this was published in 1991. And so what it is just a network of computers that use the same basic language and protocols to talk to each other. You can see with this particular website, it's very bare bones. It's very simple. There's no color. There's no layout. It's just text and then links. The thing that makes the internet, it originally made the internet very exciting to the people who developed it, besides being able to access information on a computer, was hyperlinks. Hyperlinks are the blue pieces of text that are used to link one document to another. And so that was really, the very first internet was basically just that, text and hyperlinks. And it was mostly designed as a tool for researchers and academics and writers and, also hobbyists and technologists to share information. And so it made sharing information, much, much faster than it had been in the past. So it was a very revolutionary concept. The internet that we know is very different, and we'll take a look at examples of that in a moment. But let's go even further backwards and look at what the internet, the research came out of. So we're going to look at something called the ARPANET. And so we can see the ARPANET is sort of an early version of the internet. This is kind of a map of the ARPANET at the time. And you can see there are locations on here. So this one says Harvard right here. If we zoom in right there, this one says NYU. This one says MIT. Let's see, Stanford. Let's see, Texas down here, Pentagon. Okay, so these are all physical locations that are mapped out on this network. And these addresses are addresses of computers. And the ARPANET was basically designed in the 70s to distribute information across a bunch of different servers and computers distributed across the country. And there's a lot of reasons for this. There's just a general interest in the ability to do this. But another thing that really drove the ARPANET early on was the government and sort of fear of the Cold War. There's during the Cold War, people were afraid of a sort of nuclear war, and because of that, they wanted to create a system where they could distribute important information across the country, so that if the Soviets bombed New York or DC, the information would be able to be saved and distributed across this big network. So that was one of the reasons that people wanted to create the ARPANET. You can see a more geographical version of this internet, this network, and you can see all the nodes that are connected together. So that was some of the research that preceded the internet, and then as that technology got more sophisticated, eventually the World Wide Web project and the World Wide Web Consortium got together and said, this could be a really great public good for academics and just the common people to be able to share information and to publish information without having to go through centralized distribution authorities like a newspaper or a book publisher or a television network, something like that. So that's one of the first kind of like big things that's interesting about the internet, is the idea of centralized versus decentralized information. So let's talk about that for a moment. So we have centralized. Let's put a big centralized here, and then we have decentralized. Okay, so when we talk about centralized, what we normally mean is that we have one center that controls the information. So this might be a network like ABC or a newspaper like the New York Times. Just do this. Okay. And so there's a central sort of authority that collects information and edits information and then distributes it outward. So it distributes it to readers or viewers or other parties. So this is a centralized form of information, and the power is sort of concentrated in the center. So if you're a big television network like ABC, NBC, whatever, or a big newspaper like the New York Times or the Washington Post, or a movie studio, all of these are examples of sort of centralized power nodes that they decide what movies get made or what television shows get produced or what articles are published, and then they push that out to the world. And we as readers, we read whatever they decide we should read. So that's a centralized network. And there's benefits to that, quality control, trusted authorities, things like that. There are some benefits to a centralized network. Decentralized network is different in the sense that each individual part of the network, each node, can communicate and receive information. So you could say, I've got my laptop right here, and over here we've got a server that's Amazon or Google, and then I've got another laptop over here that's you. And all of these nodes in the network are capable of sending information and receiving information. So we can send information and receive information from each other. We can send information and receive information from different platforms. And so a decentralized network, there's no central authority that decides what gets published. In some ways, this is blended together because we do have these big platforms like Amazon and Google, and they do have control over what they publish and what they put out there. But in general, the idea of a decentralized network is I can make a blog or a website and I can put whatever I want on there, whether it's research, whether it's pictures of my cat, and anybody in the world can access that. There's no restrictions on distribution. So the internet makes that possible through basically computer technology and digital communication. So just really quickly, I won't spend too much time on this because it's getting a little bit technical, but we can think about why centralized information was easy in the past and decentralized information was made possible with the internet. So a million years ago, if you wanted to talk to somebody, way a long time ago, you'd have to send them a letter or whatever. At a certain point, we got telephone technology. Okay, so telephone technology is sort of a decentralized network. So let's say I have a phone. This doesn't really look like a phone. Let's try that again. Okay, let's say I have a telephone. Wow, okay, that's even worse. Okay, how do you draw a telephone like that? Okay, so let's say I have a telephone. So if I want to make a call, there's going to be a switchboard. So I'm going to pick up my telephone, which is connected with a little line, and that's going to go into the switchboard. I'm going to dial in a number, and the switchboard is going to match that number to an output, and that's going to connect to another telephone over here. Okay, and so then we can talk to each other. I can talk into the receiver, and or I can talk into the microphone, and I'll hear out of the speaker, and you can do the same thing on the other end. So before we had the internet, that's how a lot of electronic communication worked. And the way that worked is basically my voice would get turned into an electronic signal, so it would kind of like measure when my voice was loud or quiet, just like we looked at when we were looking at Audacity, and it sends it over this line and through here, and then it comes out the other end, and vice versa. So with the telephone, we need people on each side to pick up the phone, dial in the thing, and then say the information into the phone. What the internet did early on is it used these same kind of networks, but instead of using a telephone, it used a computer. And so the computer would talk, and the computer would talk in a string of data, ones and zeros, just like we talked about at the very beginning of the semester when we were talking about data with our images. And so we wouldn't be able to understand this just by listening to it, but another computer could. And so another computer could receive this string of ones and zeros, and it could recreate your voice on the other end, or whatever other piece of information you're using. Oh, whoops, I'm covering that part of my drawing. Okay, So we replaced the phone lines with computers, and computers are really, really fast. So they can transfer this information incredibly fast, almost instantaneously, which obviously we can't do. We can't talk instantaneously or describe data instantaneously. So our ability to transfer information increased by a lot when we used a computer, and that allows us to transfer data across large areas of space and large networks almost instantaneously. The problem is that to do this, in order to make this part here make sense to this computer's information makes sense to this computer's information over here, what we needed to do was create protocols. And so that is what we did. So come back for a second. So we made a lot of different protocols in order to make this possible. And that's part of what we're going to be learning when we learn about the internet. So protocols are basically like a set of rules that say, if you say this kind of information, we're going to interpret it a certain way. And so some of the early protocols that we still use are HTTP. You might recognize that. We'll look at it in the browser in a second. And FTP is another one. File transfer protocol, and then we also created technologies like HTML and things like that. So let's look at a couple of these protocols real quick so we can see what they look like. So if I open up basically any website and I click on this browser bar at the top, there's going to be a URL here, and they actually don't show it anymore in the modern browsers. But if I move my mouse over here, you'll see this HTTPS right here. And so what this HTTP stands for is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Hypertext is referring to these links. The fact that we can link one page to another page is called hypertext. And so Hypertext Transfer Protocol is a protocol that communicates with different computers about how to recreate a hypertext document. These days, there's a little S on the end, which stands for secure. And so this is just an added level of security on top of the basic protocol. So that's the one that we still use today. We won't use FTP in this class, but we used to use another protocol called FTP, which is File Transfer Protocol. That's basically just a protocol for putting the documents into a place so they can be accessed by other people. But we kind of skip that step by using GitHub as our publishing platform. So there's a lot of different protocols that are used for computers to understand each other. There's also different languages and different standards that get used. In the very early versions of the internet, so before most of you guys were probably alive or using the internet, most of the internet was just web pages, just HTML, simple web pages with links, maybe some images, maybe some styling, but we didn't have a lot of the features that we had today. If you look up GeoCities, you guys may have heard of GeoCities. It's not around anymore, but it was a very popular hosting platform, and so it has this like particular style. And if you look at GeoCities, you can see, it kind of has like a specific style. Let's see if we can find examples of it. Or maybe we can look at this GeoCities gallery. Okay, so this is actually a really good example. This looks like it's sort of an archive of some GeoCities websites. And this is kind of what the internet looked like in the 90s when I first started using it. When I was like 10 years old and I first got AOL, I was very excited about using the internet, and I was very excited about making websites to publish comics and drawings that I was doing. So that's really what first got me interested in technology, which is a big part of why I am talking to you right now. Anyway, so let's look at some of these. Okay, so this is a really good example. So here's a whole bunch of websites associated with Area 51. Let's see, maybe let's look at Meteor. Okay, so this is a really good example. These are a bunch of different GeoCities websites kind of connected to this one thread. And so you can kind of see different types of websites. So they're very basic, not a lot of like animations or moving parts, just really simple stuff. And this is what the web looked like for most of the 90s until the early 2000s. So that was called Web 1.0. And that's when we basically just used HTML and CSS, which is what we're going to learn in this class. And we didn't really add a lot on top of that. But during the 90s, the web became very, very popular. And so people started thinking about, how do I add more stuff on top of this? And so certain languages were developed, like JavaScript, or media embeds like Flash were developed to make websites more interactive, make it so that you could log into services and post on forums and buy things. That was a big driving factor. And so the web changed a lot in the late 90s and early 2000s, and eventually we got Web 2.0. Amazon is probably one of the bigger drivers of that change. I'm sure you guys have used Amazon before. In the 90s, Jeff Bezos, who created Amazon, basically realized that the internet was going to be really big, and if he could figure out a way to sell stuff on the internet, he was going to make lots of money, and he turned out to be right about that. And the interesting thing, you may or may not know this, is he started out with books. So Amazon used to just be a book selling website, and he had this sort of insight that if he a lot of people would read books that they couldn't get at their local bookstore. It was kind of hard to get, you can only carry a certain number of books in a bookstore, and there's millions of books in the world. So if you wanted a book that wasn't in your local bookstore, buying it online was a really good option. And so he sort of realized that and was able to basically create a market for books online. And then through that market, he got lots of people logging in, he got lots of people's contact information, and so he kind of had this built-in audience for the platform. And then after that, he started just selling everything. And now, obviously, people buy everything on Amazon. People watch TV on Amazon. It's become a big service. But the main thing that was kind of driving this was the possibility for commercial products being sold on the internet. So taking out, making commerce more efficient. And that was a big driver of Web 2.0. Another big driver was social media. You guys might remember, or you probably don't, but you might remember some of the early social media networks like Friendster. Friendster, I guess, is still around. Kind of predated Facebook. There's also MySpace. MySpace was the first social network that I was on. It's also still around. It's sort of music focused. It was mostly like bands. You could follow bands, but you could also follow other people. But you'll notice with these websites, they have this sign up or sign in button, just like we do on our Open Lab site. And most of the sites that you use today have those login features. Those were all Web 2.0 things. That wasn't really doable so much in the early version of the web. That became more doable when we started adding cloud infrastructure and JavaScript and more sophisticated backend and things like that to the web. That was in the late 90s, early 2000s. Then, of course, the iPhone came out in 2007, and that changed things a lot, where we started to have apps where you couldn't, you didn't even know what website you were on, even though it was still using the internet to do everything. All of the sort of control of the internet was kind of obscured from the user in the iPhone and with apps and things like that. More recently, we kind of started to jump into Web 3, although it seems like that jump didn't really pick up. If you're familiar with that at all, that's more like crypto-related stuff and blockchain-related technologies and things like that. So there's a push to move to Web 3, where we had more decentralized currency and things like that. But that, as far as I can tell, hasn't quite taken off, although it is, a lot of people use it. So that's a very, very brief and very incomplete history of the internet. We are really only going to be learning some of the basics of the internet, just kind of getting started with some very simple development stuff. There's many other classes in media arts where we talk about JavaScript and other things that you can do with the web. But what we're going to be learning is basically just HTML and CSS. So these are two languages. I'll just talk about them for a second, but we're going to learn them in another video. So we have HTML and we have CSS. So HTML is hyper. Okay, there's that word hyper again. So hyperlinks, links between pages. Hypertext. Okay, hypertext is obviously the text of the page. Markup. So markup is probably the more obscure word here. I'll talk about that in a second. And then language is the L. Okay, so hypertext markup language. So what markup means is HTML is not really a coding language per se. And that's actually something that's probably worth remembering, just because if you're ever applying for a job and they ask you if you know how to code and you say, I know HTML, they're going to laugh at you, and you're not going to get that job, because HTML is not really coding. What it is markup. The difference is, markup is a way of basically structuring a text document. It's like writing a Word document or a Google Doc, but doing it, instead of using a platform, you're just writing the text itself. And I'll talk more about text editing in our next video. So HTML is a markup language. CSS is called cascade, or stands for cascading style sheets. We're not going to get deep enough into it to really care that much about the cascading part of this. The main thing that we're going to be worried about is the style sheet part of this. CSS is a way of adding the same styles to many different HTML pages. So that makes it easy to create a website with tons and tons of pages, but they all look the same because we have one CSS document that updates all the pages, which is a really useful thing. And that's one of the things that we'll be looking at in our project. CSS is also not technically coding. CSS is a style sheet language. You can kind of argue more that CSS is a coding language because there's certain things you can do with it that you can't do with HTML, but it's not really a classical coding language. We're not going to learn it in this class, but the third web technology that you might learn when you're starting out is JavaScript, and this is the actual programming language that you would use with the web. If you're interested in that, we have classes like MMP 210 and maybe MMP 350 where you'll learn some of that. The other technology that we're not really going to talk about, but just to mention it briefly, is back end. So on the web, especially in the modern web, there's two parts to the web. There's servers and there's clients. So there's servers and clients. Clients are anything where you're receiving information. So that could be a laptop. It could be a phone. It could be your smart refrigerator with the temperature on it or whatever. It could be your car if you've got a car with a GPS in it. All of these things are clients. They receive information from servers, and then they communicate out to a server. Servers are just computers with nobody behind them. Servers are just sitting in a warehouse somewhere owned by Google or Amazon, and they basically just receive requests from clients. They find the data, and then they send the data back. So what we're doing is called front end development, because we're working on what the client sees. Back-end development is the code that makes the servers work. And so back-end usually runs on different things. You could use PHP or JavaScript or other languages, but we're not going to be talking about that in this class, or we're not going to be learning about it. But just to kind of cover it, if people talk about back-end, some people might use, this isn't as popular as it used to be, but people used to use the term full stack to refer to somebody who did both back-end and front-end programming. So just so you're aware of those terms, that's what those mean. But we're just going to be focused on front-end. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to get into writing some HTML. So we'll download a text editor. We'll write some simple HTML and go over some basic syntax, and then we'll upload it to a website. All right, and so yeah, see you guys in the next video.